everybody. It is 5:23, and we will call the Long Range Committee meeting to order. Britton is missing tonight. So I will be running the meeting. Oh. Have you made me a co-host?
Sorry.
Have you made me a co-host?
Oh, I need to do that? Okay. Yeah, I can do that for you. Thanks for the reminder.
I'm sorry. So our first item on the agenda is the bylaws amendment for officer removal. And Sarah, I believe you were going to cover that.
Sure. Do you have the document open that you could share screen on?
Yes, I do.
All right. This is basically cleaning up one portion of the bylaws and then just addressing a gap in the bylaws. The first proposed change is going to be in the provision regarding cell phones. You can tell these are a little bit dated because it speaks to cell phones and pagers. According to the current bylaws, we're completely prohibited from using cell phones during meetings. I think that's really dated. Sometimes we're looking up data on there. We're certainly looking up things on our iPads. So it's my recommendation that we get rid of the provision that the cell phones have to be turned off, and then possibly remove the provision altogether about pagers. I'm indifferent to that, but I think it's kind of a non-issue. The main provisions I'd recommended changing was just addressing what to do with officers in case one needed to be removed or one needed to be replaced. We have had some turnover on the commission midterm. It's not been our officers, but that is certainly a possibility. So this is just a recommended way to fill that spot. And then as far as removal from office, I certainly don't anticipate that we would need to do that, but in the event that we did, my proposed language would be that it would be a 2/3 affirmative vote of currently appointing planning commissioners to remove somebody from that, just because they are somebody who's elected by the body, and we want kind of a higher threshold if we're going to remove someone from that. I'm not married to any of this language or requirements. I just think it's something that you don't need until you do need and would like to put in there, but I'm open to any feedback, any discussion on this.
I think it's pretty reasonable. I don't have any issue with it. I'm kind of glad this was brought up because, I did look at the rule about cell phones, and I know often for me personally, it might be something where I'm using a different map set than what's on my iPad, or, something's running slow, so I run it off my phone, whatever it may be. But, there's nuance, especially in our today's age and how we work. So I appreciate this being brought up.
Okay, the removal of officers, we had this in two places. So Sarah, I believe what you gave us, you had placed under financial interests. And so this is what we had that you gave us to put under
I did not designate where it needed to be placed in the bylaws. I just proposed the language for that, and that was added in without me. And then I think Britton had drafted up some language that would make it a little bit different, that a nominating committee would be formed for that. I am not in favor of that, though I'm open to discussion on that, just because if it's an officer who's gone, it could be the chair, and the chair is the one who nominates that committee, and it would take a while. Probably to go through that process. So that is an option if that's something that the commission wants to do. But I do like the language as proposed.
Okay, so this language that she...
Basically, we have a version that I submitted and a version that she had drafted up separately, and I wanted both versions to be submitted to the committee just to know that there are options here. It doesn't have to look a certain way.
Okay. So your version, she had had me put up here in this financial thing. So this doesn't have the, the subcommittee for this. So for removal from office and replacement of officers, we have an officer may be removed from their position with a 2/3 affirmative vote of all currently appointed planning commission members. A motion to remove an officer may be made at any regularly scheduled commission meeting or special session of the planning commission and need to be placed on the agenda prior to the meeting. The vote shall be taken in the same manner as described in section B4. Is that your language, Sarah?
That's my language, but it would need to be placed under the officers section. So
Okay.
sections 5 and 6 on this document, I'm sorry, sections 4 and 5 under officers, that is Britton's language that she wrote up. That is not a current version of our bylaws.
Yes. Yes. And
So it would be that 4 and 5 and this 4 and 5 are just some proposals.
okay.
But they would both need to be under the officers section, whichever version. If the committee decided to move this forward for full planning commission, then that's where it would go. And also, this does not apply to any subdivision committee, any other committees. This is just the body as a whole, because the way the bylaws are written, those committees are at the discretion of the chair.
Okay.
So this is just officer rules for the full planning commission.
Okay, does anybody have any comments on how they would like to do that, whether they'd like to do it with a, just a 2/3 vote, or with a, subcommittee, which language they prefer? And,
Couple questions about it.
okay,
I'm fine with the 2/3.
okay,
Sherry, it's Porter.
yes,
Okay, so this is just for secretary, chair, and vice chair. Is that right?
is that right, Sarah?
That's correct. It would just be as officers, and it's not for the seats itself. It's just for the voted on officers of the entire planning commission.
And that's to have, say, a chair no longer be a chair, or a vice chair no longer be a vice chair, but it doesn't remove them from the planning commission itself. Is that correct?
That's correct. They would not be removed from the planning commission. And whatever version of this, if we decide this is something that we want to do, this is going to be run through Blake before we would have a full vote on it.
Okay,
Okay, and then the next one is assuming that we have 9 commissioners present, that would be a 6-2 vote, because the officer themselves might not vote on it. Would that be sufficient for removal?
There is nothing in as it's written that would prevent the person from voting in favor of themselves. So as it's written, it would be 6 votes no matter what, because it's 2/3 of the currently appointed commission, unless there is a vacancy.
And then that was the next question. If there, say we just don't have, say we only have 6 commissioners present at the meeting at the time, are we talking about 4 of 6 at that point, or are we still talking about 6?
We're still talking about 6 the way it's written. It would be 6 members of the appointed commissioners, not 2/3 of commissioners present at that particular meeting, just because we have some meetings where we've barely met a quorum, and that would prevent kind of rule by minority.
Okay, I think that's the scenarios that I could think of, but if I kind of like that idea, and so let's see, let's run it through Blake and see what he adds to it.
and then we have replacement of officers. The commission may fill a permanent officer vacancy as soon as the next regularly scheduled commission meeting or special session. An officer vacancy may be filled with a majority affirmative vote of all currently appointed commission.
And then I just wonder if we should change that to a present commission.
So all currently present commission?
And I would just say, again, it kind of runs the risk of minority rule. That's the reason why I wanted it the fully appointed planning commission. If the rest of y'all feel differently about that, that's up to you.
In a way, requiring the full commission to remove somebody, but not having to require the full commission at the next meeting to appoint somebody allows us greater flexibility to get an officer back into that position so that the planning commission can function, especially if it happens to be the chair.
And I am okay with that. Does anybody else have any comments on that? Okay, then it'd be my recommendation, since there's no objection, that we amend that language in there. The proposal to be from a majority affirmative vote of all present commissioners, or all commissioners. Yeah.
Okay.
All commissioners present. Yes.
Okay. Okay. And then we'll look at Britain's real fast.
And that's just, Britain's version is just a different version of what was submitted. That's one that would create a committee and would be supermajority. So if we agree with the language that we just discussed, then we can look at this, but it would basically, we've already settled on it.
So is everybody okay with not even bothering with looking at the other version, since we're good with what Sarah's presented?
It's not. We would still normally have basically the Britain's version for regularly appointing. The Sparkman's version is for special circumstances. Is that right?
No,
that's correct. There wouldn't be anything that would change our current process for nominating officers, unless that was the desire, but that's certainly not what I'm presenting this evening. This would just address the vacancies.
Hi, this is Joe. I'm in support of Sarah's version for that part.
Okay.
The 2/3 vote.
Then I don't know if we need to take a vote on this or not. We'll leave that up to the chair. But if this is the version that this committee is in favor of, Sherry, if you could send that to legal, and whenever we can get it on the agenda.
Okay, we can do that. Can we vote on that? Who all is in favor of taking Sarah's version for cell phones? Should I do it all together? I think we can do it all together because I think everybody was on board with it. For cell phones, the removal of a chair and how to fill a vacancy. Are we good with taking those versions all to be the ones to be taken to Blake to be voted on later?
With the changes that we discussed, including the language under replacement of officers being, instead of majority affirmative vote of currently appointed, to be a majority affirmative vote of all commissioners present, and that being moved into the officer section of the bylaws.
Yes.
Yes.
Is that a yes from everybody? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so moving on to our next item of business. We have the missing middle housing presentation that staff created, and then we can move on if you all would like to after that to look at the pattern zoning representation from before. Let's see if I can get this to, hold on. Should have had it open. Yay, I did it. Couldn't see what I was doing, but I did it anyway. That's pretty good. Okay. So, we all wanted to go over missing middle housing after a recent planning commission meeting, just to get a better understanding of what missing middle actually is. And so missing middle housing is very in line with our 2040 plan. There's only one of the goals for our 2040 plan, which isn't kind of, or one or two goals of the 2040 plan that isn't pretty much right in line with missing middle housing. We will make appropriate infill. That's a high priority for missing middle housing. We will discourage suburban sprawl, make compact, complete, connected development a standard. Those are all three related to missing middle, and so is number 6. We will create opportunities for attainable housing. It can be very well argued that missing middle housing also attributes to 4 and 5, as missing middle is defined as being part of walkable and multimodal transportation areas. I mean, it's intended for those areas, and it helps, if done correctly, preserve natural areas as well. And then in our next steps from the 2040 plan, it mentions, I believe, all but 1 or 2 of these as well. Develop protocols for infill, anyway, promote context-sensitive setbacks, which is missing middle is in line with form-based code. That's something that's throughout. The guy who coined this, his book, Daniel Paralek, mentions all of this, including pre-building designs, which doesn't have to be part of missing middle, but it can be. And spot zoning is a big part of it. So this is Daniel Paralek's illustration on what missing middle is, and you can see it's the housing types between single family and massive multifamily. And he mentions that it's located in walkable neighborhoods. And just to help illustrate that missing middle does not necessarily mean it has to be attainable housing, I put this picture of puppy dogs up there, and you know, just by looking at this picture of puppy dogs, can you tell me which one should be the most expensive? It depends on which one you want, which type that you're interested in, and what you like. And missing middle housing has been missing from development for at least around the last 40 years. During that time, the need for this type of housing hasn't gone away. There's been kids move out of their parents' house and they need something smaller to be able to move into. With sprawl the way that it is, with housing developments based on income to incremental levels. So houses in this neighborhood are all $250,000, and then you go over to the next sprawl step out and they're all $350,000. So everybody's divided by income so much that if your children move out, they can't live in the same neighborhood, or if you need to cut down on expenses because you're now in retirement, you can't live in the same neighborhood. So missing middle provides that for people who just need a smaller house because they've just moved out of their parents' house, or they've just gotten rid of their kids and can now have a smaller place. And because of that, they can be in high demand and they can be extremely expensive. However, they do tend to be between 60% and 110% of AMI, and but they can exist anywhere on the price scale. So here's some examples from Daniel Paralek's website on what missing middle is. He's got duplex stacked. I chose the illustrations that I did because they show the lot size. This is only 45 foot of street frontage, and then 125 back. And then duplex side by side. I apparently have moved my slides out of order and got myself confused. So part of the reason for missing middle is because of the walkability of it. And to illustrate that, I wanted to show you this. Through my previous life doing consulting work, we interviewed some people when we were doing a comprehensive housing analysis. We interviewed some people who we felt to be experts in the field of development and asked them what they look for to develop in this very poor town that we were working with to help them figure out how to get developers there. And they said, you look for a nexus of opportunity. And for families, that nexus is school, restaurant, and grocery stores. For single people, it tends to be parks, bar, and entertainment. The reason why the families can get away without the park is because they have the school where they can access the playground generally. And this is where people tend to want to live. The coffee is thrown in there because I attended the National Planning Commission conference, National Planning Conference in San Diego this year, and one of the speakers there had a brilliant presentation that illustrated. He followed Instagram. He pulled Instagram data to see what people used hashtags on to describe the places where they wanted to be and culture. So these are their actual opinions instead of using tags that people can tag where they're at even when they're not there. The Instagram data, he could find out where they were making the post from and what they were saying about it. And it turned out that coffee is the number one thing that people tie to culture. And so that's why coffee's in there. And just to give you an idea, so we looked at the housing data from the ACS 2020, and 60% of Fayetteville households are families, 19% are single, and 20% are living with non-relatives. So non-relatives, maybe that's a makeshift family, or maybe it's because they're all single students. So that could fall into either category. And so going back to the duplexes, this is Fayetteville's version of what we just saw on the slide, 2 slides back for duplexes. We have duplex stacked on in Washington Willow and in Wilson Park, and then duplexes side by side in Wilson Park and near the University of Arkansas. This here goes back to the walkable neighborhoods and how you get that nexus of opportunity you want in the neighborhoods. With the missing middle housing, Target has, it's the only example that we could find where they have micro stores, so smaller than Walmart neighborhood Walmarts. A lot of these are, they can be anywhere from, I believe it was 500 square feet up to 1,200 square feet was the average, so not much bigger than or anywhere from ADU size to a single family home size. And they have things that the community wants. Target researches the community extremely well to see what that particular neighborhood really, that people in the Watershed actually want to buy, and that's what they stock in those stores, food and whatever else the people are buying in those areas. So since you can see this is triplex stacked and fourplex stacked up here. Since people who are looking for missing middle housing are looking for walkability, and missing middle housing is more of an infill type of housing and is located in a walkable context, people are willing to give up some of their square footage in order to be able to get this. And here's Fayetteville's version of a triplex stacked and a fourplex stacked. And the one on the triplex on Spring Street there, you wouldn't guess it's a triplex driving by it. There's a lot of triplexes and quadplexes in that area that they just look like houses. I mean, just like normal houses. But that one has 3 mailboxes on it. And the one that's directly to I get turned around with the directions, to the east of it is a duplex that looks very similar to this one. And here's multiplex and courtyard apartments. You can see those small lot sizes. And one thing that Daniel Perlek brought up was that we need to quit using the words density and affordable, because it throws up red flags for people. If you can just show people pictures of what will bring that density. So whenever there's a development, you bring pictures of what's proposed instead of saying that it's going to be 50 units. You show how that 50 units is going to look. And he mentioned that with missing middle housing, and really it's really part of what form-based code is. You show the form of what the building should be instead of what the density should be. And if a developer can get that density with that form, then that's what you're concerned with. And then again, this is Fayetteville's version of multiplex and courtyard apartments. And then because Mary Madden had mentioned that cluster housing and courtyard apartments are not the same thing. What we call cluster housing isn't. Cluster housing is actually courtyard apartments. She's right, according to the definition of it, but starting in 2014, a series of ordinances went through over a period of time, and somebody put a whole lot of effort into getting the name for courtyard apartments changed to cluster housing according to Fayetteville's ordinances. So we know it's not the same, but somebody worked really hard to change it. And cluster development is what you see in this picture here, which is the intent of it is to preserve the area around it, so you build more dense where it makes less impact on the surrounding area, and that way you can preserve the surrounding area. And then we have townhouse and live work, and Fayetteville's version of townhouse and live work. And again, it doesn't matter what type of housing you're building. When there's not enough housing, it's all going to be expensive. But all we can do is make sure that we create more housing. And then Jim Garlock had mentioned to look at past presentations on missing middle because it's been brought up before. This is the presentation that Karab and Jalen apparently presented at an agenda session at some point in time. So if anybody wants us to look through that, we can do that. I'm open for discussion on anything.
Thanks, Sherry. Does staff have any immediate recommendations on maybe potential code changes we could make to help help promote missing middle housing? I know, one of the issues we've wrestled with over the years is that it's a lot easier to build duplexes, large, like 2,200 square foot unit, single unit duplexes together. So, these 4,000 square foot complexes, instead of, building something with a similar floor or footprint of like 8 single studio apartments or something like that. And so is there any recommendations from you and Britton in the meantime on things we can do today or code changes we could start to look at that might help promote this type of building?
Well, what we're looking at right now, so that was a question that I brought up in January, February about how come so Jonathan Kurth and I had a conversation, and he mentioned that the neighborhood that's just west of my neighborhood, so out there by Elk Creek Elementary School, has a higher density than what the developer decided to build. So they had the ability to go to RSF 8, and they chose to build for RSF 4. And so that really made me want to start research, and I've been looking into it since then. On trying to figure out why developers build what they build. Is it because they're comfortable with what they're building? Is it because the market studies out there are for what is built most? So what sells most instead of what sells for the most? Like for instance, if somebody builds a whole subdivision, that's a whole lot of houses that go up for sale, and when we're in need of houses, people buy what's for sale. But if a house goes for sale in a historic district like Washington Willow, it's snatched up immediately, and it may go for $1 million or more. Which may be what people want, but it's not available. Yes, Jim? Jim Garlock, I see you have your hand up.
Once you get finished, I was raising a hand to finish. I wanted to hear you, but a thought came to mind as you were talking.
Oh, no, that's fine. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I think a part of it's Adam Smith and the invisible hand, if you will, in that I think, like you say, builders build what they're comfortable, but I think behind that, there's also a profit motive. Some of the older triplexes and fourplexes, like at the bottom corner over on Reagan Street, I think that is, they're built a while back. And I think most of the people now, if they have 0.6 of an acre rather than building a triplex or a fourplex, they're coming through and building either apartments with maybe 10 units in it and getting it rezoned to RIU or more intensity. So I think that's also kind of maybe an unspoken issue about the ability to, one, do what you're comfortable with, but also maximize the profit and knowing you can always fill them up, if you will. Just a thought. Thank you.
Yes. So two things on that subject. So that's one thing that I brought up to Britton as soon as she came on, that we need to look at in order to discover why developers build that. I was thinking that maybe part of that is that the market studies show what sells most, like, when a huge subdivision is built, instead of what's for the most. And then if that's the case, if if they can't get financing because the market study is the only thing it has to look at is the sprawl, the big subdivisions instead of, because there's not enough of the individual houses. That maybe we could do market studies of our own based on the types of infill development that we would like and give that to the bank. So in order to figure out where we need to go, I'm working on pro formas for the different, for the actual types of lots that come for sale here in Fayetteville, and based on what the underlying zoning district says is the Vulcan area requirement for that lot. And I'm going to be putting out surveys for developers around here to give me information on what they use for their pro formas. I've already built a pro forma, but what they use for their pro formas and what the numbers are that they use be kept confidential. Obviously, their information would be confidential to me, so I can, once I have a good idea of what their numbers are and their costs are, then I can figure out what the actual costs are to build. And that would give me, Matt, an idea on what we need to change in the code in order to be able to make it so the developer can produce what we're wanting to produce. So make sure that we're not standing in the way of that.
And Sherry, I don't have it pulled up. Are we talking about pattern zoning as a separate function? Or
We are talking about as a separate function, but I mean, it's part of this agenda item too. Do you want me to go ahead and go to that?
Yeah, we'll see what everyone else thinks. I mean, I think that's going to tie in for sure. I know Andrew's got his hand up, but I'm definitely looking. This is something that I think we've been talking about for a long time, and I know development thresholds and fire safety issues are all components of this, and so they make things a lot harder for us to build what some other cities are able to do, or what even, historical districts like Washington Willow, who a lot of those homes used to be, triplexes before being converted into single family homes. Those are harder to build today, but I'll yield the floor and see what the other commissioners have to say.
Yes, Andrew?
Yeah, so, I have quite a bit of experience talking with developers, and, I would say the common thing that I think it's a mix of things, right? It's what I know this sells, I know this rents, and, you've got builder grade, you've got higher luxury grade stuff. And generally, if you look at some of the stuff that's in downtown Bentonville, that I think we actually walked through, those are not your typical, I mean, those are renting or selling for $400 a foot. And while missing middle is not necessarily, affordable, or in some cases attainable, you've got to go out on a ledge, and you've got to convince your banker that, I can rent this property for, $3 a foot, considering that everything in East or in West Fayetteville is $1.50. So it's tough to pro forma that. And then additionally, the cost, you go and change floor plans, and you want to put, you want to build a triplex on a previous single family home. There's additional costs come into that. That's higher than what you would get with just building a single family home. I think, again, I'm not a pro. So there's a challenge there. I think when if you're trying to incentivize this stuff, generally I look at either the carrot or the stick, and I don't know, and this may bleed into pattern zoning, but I think there's got to be an incentive to take maybe a smaller lot, and instead of just placing a single family home on it, can we put a quadplex, and can we offer any help, any guidance, anything like that would help guide folks to adding 3 housing units instead of 1. I don't know that this is necessarily a code thing. I think you can kind of fit things within boxes and building envelopes with setbacks and green space and sidewalks. but we've got to find a way to help move that needle based on what we have. Other areas are doing this. I think some of the projects that the guy that wrote the book showed were generally, there were infill pieces, but the ones that are kind of all encompassing that the kids can buy in the same neighborhood or mom and dad can buy in the same neighborhood that the kids are in, those were large developments that took large swaths of land. So there's two different pieces to it. But I'd be curious finding a way that we can help guide folks into this. It's not as cost prohibitive. It's not weird and funky, and you're not going to ever rent it or sell it.
Yes. One of the things that we looked at for incentives, possible incentives, is, maybe ways to expedite the process, which also pattern zoning ties in with as well. Maybe the possibility of, if it's the type of development that we're looking for as a city that creates more density, maybe there's ways that we can look at expediting the process. But we haven't got into that incredibly much, except for, pro formas, feasibility studies, and market studies that we might be able to have available for the developer if they need to take it. So we're still in the baby steps of this. But yeah, Daniel Paralek, I believe one of his big developments, like what you were talking about, is in Nebraska or Iowa. It's in one of those states that doesn't have huge populations. And he said that he didn't expect the development that he did to be, he kept telling them this isn't the ideal, it was out in the middle of nowhere, and he did a whole neighborhood like that. But, and it turned out to be very successful. People love it just because the front porches and everybody getting to talk to each other. But his hope is more for infill, but anytime you can build a big development, that's this whole missing middle type of goal where we have walkability and everything. Of course, he's going to do that. Okay, so Matt, did you want me to go ahead and hand this off to you?
Yeah, I can't control it or anything, but I think it'd be helpful just to talk through this. As for those who've been on the commission for a while, I know our past commissioner Matt Hoffman had presented this at a national conference about basically working and to find ways to create homes that fit the character of existing neighborhoods that could be built in a missing middle mentality where we could sneak in infill through compatible duplexes and triplexes and get them in a way that like I said, matches the character and appeal of the neighborhood. So we'll just get into the next slide here. So the idea behind this, and Sherry, maybe you can speak more to the RFP that went out, or if there's any updates on that. But the idea here is working towards basically having pre-approved building designs that could be almost kind of, put anywhere in the city. You wouldn't have to go and, have an architect work on it, go in, get everything reviewed by the city. These would be kind of items that you could kind of jump ahead a few steps, lower the cost to build, and in essence lower the, potentially bring in affordable housing through reduced spend, and then also just allow even smaller developers to kind of come in and build some of these. So this was a great presentation that Matt did. I wish we had it on video because I think it'd be really helpful. We'll probably have him come and speak to it at some point in the future as we look into these things. But They're looking at a variety of building types. And Sherry, maybe this is where I'll lean on you on if there's any updates on the RFP and if this process has already begun.
Yes, this process has definitely already begun. They're still negotiating on what the building types are going to be and how that's going to be delivered. The last I heard, my understanding was that they're looking at the city would pay basically like a subscription for I think it might have been 6 to 8 different designs that people could use for different, it depends on the type of lot you're going to place it on. And as long as you, because we're paying for those, the average citizen could download that plan, and as long as they did the plan exactly the way that it is, then it'd be administratively approved. And so that's part of expediting the process, really, for everything. But yes, we're still in negotiation on that. Yes, Andrew?
So does this create like does this create almost an architecture design committee that you're, a developer, builder, whomever has these plans and they say, okay, but I want to change the front facade with stone instead of brick, or kind of what does that look like? Or is that even?
If they change anything, then it doesn't get administratively approved. So if my understanding is if they change anything, they still have to go through the same process that everybody else has to go through. They have to take it as it is, or it's essentially their own thing.
And Andrew, to add to that, I think the idea is that each design will then have kind of plug and play architectural elements and pre-approved building materials. So other than like changing an actual roof line, or any like actual major modifications, I think there is quite a bit of flexibility within each design from a pre-approved standpoint.
And I think the Bryant, Texas one that MBL did, there were even different versions of those designs, and it wasn't just architectural elements like, a plan. I think they had like left and right versions of a plan, and so there were changes, even kind of structural changes that could be made that were part of that plan set that could be approved by staff.
Yeah, we already have a consultant chosen. It's just negotiation on what that final product is. And I have not been I haven't heard anything on that in a little while. Okay, so does anybody else have any more comments or questions on pattern zoning?
Sorry about the dog in the background, but questions about, is there a cost analysis that goes along with these so that somebody has some idea on, what their costs or profit might be?
I have not been made aware of that.
As a builder deciding to do a project, especially using my own money or something like that, that would be having some idea on what the project would cost and what I might be getting out of it is a huge incentive to actually do the project.
That's a good point. And since I'm already doing pro formas, and there's I'll end up doing at some point some kind of feasibility study or market study anyway. That might be something that we can come to at some point in time, it's definitely something that I will make sure gets passed on. Okay, anything else on pattern zoning or missing middle housing? Okay, well then we'll go ahead and move on to the Enduring Green Network. So just to get you up to date on where we're at, the Parks is currently working on their master plan, and they're looking at their main focuses are on nature resilience and natural connections. And urban forestry is looking at updating their tree canopy survey. And sustainability is working on updating their sustainability plan based on Teresa Turk's resolution that she got passed last fall. Basically, they're wanting to look at the Enduring Green Network as an ecosystem service. And so that's what we have on the Enduring Green Network, and we'd love to hear what all are your interests for the Enduring Green Network that you would like us to look at. Currently, our tools that we have to enforce the Enduring Green Network basically is we have residential agriculture zoning, so we have our zoning districts that we can control density with for a little bit, by a little bit, and then there's something that we might be able to look into things like transfer of development rights, things like that. So just let me, we're just looking for your input on what you would like to see. Oh, yes, Commissioner Johnson.
Thanks. I think for me, I think it'd be helpful for us to have a tool kind of like the, watershed, stream protection zone where we have at least some kind of measurable tool against what do we do when something is in the Enduring Green Network. I think even the map is sometimes confusing on, okay, well here it is, but if we flat it and let it become a neighborhood, the only tool that's present is our existing tree preservation. So I don't know if it's an overlay district. I don't know if it's like, if we make it like the streamside protection plan, but just finding a way to set some tools and processes for us to understand how to treat those situations and have some ground to stand on. Because right now it is pretty at least to me, it feels just very arbitrary. It's like, well, here it is, but we don't really know what it is or what we're doing to preserve it.
Okay, Matt. Speaking to not knowing exactly what it is, so in the 2040 plan, it says that basically what we have now is a map tool, and that map tool is just a general area of places to look at to see if it should be EGN, Enduring Green Network. So it's not even, we haven't even really decided what area within what we have on the map is actually Enduring Green Network. We just said, this is an area to look at and see if we think, maybe. So what would all of you say that you think would be the important elements of what should be the Enduring Green Network?
Maybe, Sherry?
Yes.
I have a few comments of that. So I actually met with the sustainability department earlier this week and discussed some of the things because they're going to be making a presentation, I guess long range, later this summer. And so they're working on a framework right now to create kind of an environmental equivalent to the infill matrix. And not necessarily just what's environmentally sensitive, but different elements that would be useful to the city in an environmental context. Walkability to a park and looking at environmental opportunities. I straight up told them, I said, we all know the concept of the Enduring Green Network, and I said, we don't have enforcement mechanisms, and, you know, so we can look at it as a concept, but it's just implementing and making sure we're doing what's best as a commission as we take this into consideration. And I will say I got some pushback from the department saying, well, that was never intended for this. It was, you know, to have, you know, regulations associated with it. It was just meant to be a land acquisition tool for the city. I'm like, well, there is hunger for, you know, information and using this as a way for us to be cognizant as we're looking at development patterns. So I think that the equivalent of the infill matrix that sustainability department is working on, I think that would be a really good stepping stone for us. Not necessarily use their version of it, but at least use that kind of as a framework in our decision making. And I think that will be a good start. Where we go from there, I'm not entirely sure. But I said, you know, enforcement and information are kind of our, you know, those are the two things that we need. And right now we're just kind of batting around ideas. But that was my discussions with them this week. And so since they are coming later this summer, maybe, you know, a good opportunity for us to kind of come up with some questions ahead of time to bring to their attention that we would like answered.
Yes, I created a presentation with the intent of showing it to Parks in early February about things that we might be able to, or maybe we should look at for the Enduring Green Network as possibilities. And one of the things that I've been looking at is transfer of development rights as a possibility. I know the big thing, the biggest concern for sustainability that I hear from them when I speak to them is they don't want to be in danger of takings. That's their biggest aspect of it. But however we decide we're going to enforce this, that stepping stone of figuring out exactly what the Enduring Green Network is, where it is going to be an important aspect of it, because we're going to have to figure out, you know, what zoning districts it is, and will help us determine what tools we can use to enforce it, or at least to incentivize people for respecting it. If we don't have an enforcement tool, maybe we can have a whole lot of carrots that make it worth protecting. Any other input or insight on that?
The only other thing that I thought might be helpful for us to pursue if we're really looking at tangible things that we can do are conservation districts. I think they've been tried a couple of different times in the city. But you know, we're always up against what we can do without kind of, you know, having to deal with state legislation. But conservation districts have, you know, certain elements to them that provide carrots for, you know, and they can be similar to cluster housing design, or cluster housing ordinances, but just broader in scope and encompass more types of development. Our cluster housing ordinance is very narrow in its application, and so expanding it and, you know, providing, you know, whether it's additional density or, you know, some kind of discount on impact fees or, you know, permit fees, to encourage people to preserve open land within either conservation easement or a deed restriction, I think could be really helpful. And it's something that could be codified instead of kind of an abstract idea. Ideally, I would love to see the Enduring Green Network codified in its entirety, codified as a conservation district. But I know that's kind of pie in the sky. But if we could take parts of it and rezone it into, you know, conservation district, I think that might be a good first step.
How would we, do you have suggestions for deed restrictions where it wouldn't end up being takings? Do you have any ideas for that?
Where it wouldn't end up being what, I'm sorry.
Where it wouldn't end up being takings, basically, where we're not,
Well, so they would have to agree to it. Obviously, this is something that you do in partnership.
okay.
So yeah, I mean, obviously you can't enforce a deed restriction on somebody, but if they're willing to make it, then you can provide them additional carrots within their development.
Okay.
Sherry and team, I'll have to jump off. But
Okay.
Feel free to keep talking. I'll vote that we move the other item we were going to discuss, the development thresholds, to next meeting.
Okay.
We can go from there. But y'all have a great night. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks. Also, Sherry,
Yes.
in answer to your first question, what do you see as enduring green network? I would say hydraulic soils, floodlands, watersheds, and wildlife pathways. And I think a good wildlife pathway that's actually kind of happened randomly was in Persimmon Place by Owl Creek, and how the house is developed on Sloan Brook below that pathway, and it still keeps that nature feel with the two lakes and the swampland. In comments with Commissioner Sparkman, I agree with that we need to have some kind of enforceable or objective value, whether it's folded into a value that's in the infill matrix. I think that would be at least a good start. So if somebody's getting annexed or getting rezoned, that if it's in an enduring network of either swamp, low water land, hydraulic soil, floodland, some reason that we need to try to preserve that unique characteristic of the area, then they should probably have a negative hit against the infill score. And then thirdly, kind of along the lines of what Commissioner McGiffrey had mentioned, if we have, say, somebody coming forward with like 30 acres that they want to develop, but yet they're going to only develop 18 of the acres and then turn over that 12 remaining acres of good usable enduring green network, then that would be something that we'd really have a positive view to. But kind of in line with Commissioner Sparkman's view is we really need to have some kind of an enforcement or at least a common understanding, if you will. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jim, I did talk with Northwest Arkansas, I can't remember the name of it, but the land trust, I think it's the Northwest Arkansas Land Trust, but it might have a fancier name, to see if that was something where people could just donate their land into the land trust, if the land trust would be willing to do that in order to have the Enduring Green Network make actual connections through the parks and all that stuff. And they said that as long as it's big chunks of land, like what you're talking about, 12 acres or something like that, that'd be something that they would work with. But if it's just individuals along the path from one park to another that happen to be in the Enduring Green Network, they don't want to mess with anything like that because they don't want to end up having to have their own planning commission in order to figure out what they're taking and what they're not and how to deal with it and all of that. So so that's something to think about along those lines.
Yeah, I would see it would be chunks of land, not individual lots, that we need to have a policy towards. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else on that? Okay. Chair Johnson had said that he would vote to move development thresholds to the next meeting. Is everybody okay with that?
That works for me if other people are amenable.
Agreeable.
Okay.
Yeah, that works.
Okay, so we will move development thresholds to the next meeting, and we will go ahead and, unless anybody else has anything else to say, we will go ahead and adjourn.